Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Influential Motherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Duncan, and as a mom and lawyer, I want to be a cheerleader for moms who don't want to give up their own goals and dreams. Around here, we celebrate moms who are making a difference and talk about ways to juggle work, motherhood, goals, faith, self-care, and more. I'm so glad you're here. The only filters we use around here are coffee filters, so pour yourself a cup and enjoy the show. On today's episode of Influential Motherhood, I'm here with Lindsey Paoli, and she is a marriage and family therapist and a mom of two cute little ones. So, Lindsey, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, today we are going to talk with Lindsey about marriage and family therapy and what that is and what it looks like and who should go and when they should go, and maybe some tools that we can have in our back pockets to avoid having to go.
Sure.
So I think these are all things that are probably good for everybody to hear, just to kind of, keep us on our toes in life and make sure that we are taking good care of our marriages and our families. So Lindsey is going to educate us on what this looks like, and then also is going to be talking about her work and being a working mom. And I have some questions for her about just the burden that she might bear in hearing people's stories and problems and how she manages that. So, Lindsey, why don't you start out and first tell us a little bit about your family and tell us how you got into the field of marriage and family therapy, because this is a little bit of kind of a second career-ish kind of thing for you, as I understand it. So tell us, so tell us about your journey into this and a little bit more about your family.
So, first, I live in Las Vegas. So, let's see, where do we start this? So, my first career was in hospitality management. I was working on the Strip. I did a lot of cocktailing, and eventually was like, I'm just going to move into management because that's what you do at a certain age. You grow into management positions. And then I was still in schools. I had transferred schools 4 times and I changed majors 4 times also. So deciding to go into hospitality management was actually just a last ditch resort. I just need to graduate with something. It's been 11 years now, and I've been in the hospitality industry. By then I was already working in front office services for a lot of really big names on the Strip. But even after graduating, I realized that it really wasn't the direction that I wanted to go in. It just happened to be one of those things where you start chasing a goal that doesn't mean anything to you, and people are saying you need to finish something. And so I finished it. But then I was working in hospitality, and I was like, I really hate this.
Yeah.
I really don't like listening to people who are on vacation complain about minor things. And as much as I wanted to be able to help people, and I love the people aspect of hospitality, it was just not a fulfilling day-to-day practice for me. So during that time, I had actually gotten married. It was not a great relationship. We had been together for 4 years and got married, and 6 months later, we were filing for divorce. And I know that had I taken some time to think about it rather than just, again, following kind of misguided expectations for where you're supposed to be in life, I would have never made that decision to begin with.
To file for divorce or
to get married at all.
Okay.
And it was the first time that people had suggested going to marriage counseling. And I had also, during all of this time, starting at 18, kind of wrestled with some depression and had been recommended to go to therapists before, but it was just not in my family's wheelhouse of what was appropriate or what could be helpful. And so it was not a consideration for me. So I went through the divorce and it was fine. But then I ended up in another really bad relationship. And so he and I decided we were going to go to couples counseling. That relationship also didn't work. He actually broke up with me at the couples counseling session.
Oh my goodness.
And so I said, I think that I'm like the common denominator in all of this. So can I just keep seeing you? Because I feel like there's something going on here that I'm like the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I had given in after, by that point, like 10 years, 12 years of being recommended to go to see a therapist.
Yeah.
And was literally like surrendering, and it was changing everything. It was changing the way that I was thinking. And I likened it to like going to yoga where and I'm not a yoga person either, but you go and like you do all these stretches and you like come out and you feel like relaxed and you're like floating on air. And it was just changing my whole perspective on everything. And
Yeah.
it was really helping me to tackle my anxiety and depression, which I had spent 12 years denying I even struggled with.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally ended up in the best relationship of my life. And it's like I started like manifesting what I was meant to be in and finding the goals and dreams that I wanted to pursue. And once I started taking my own direction, everything was falling into place.
Oh, wow.
It
That's amazing.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
So I met my husband and my current husband. And, I was in hospitality. We met online. He was also in hospitality. But he was like, we were talking about, I don't know, just future goals, things that you start talking about when you're first dating. And I was like, this isn't really what I want to do, but I'm good at it. And he was one of the first people that I really started diving into what was important in the long term.
Yeah.
And what was fulfilling. And so he's like, well, if you're not happy, then you're going to die unhappy. So you need to, you only live once and you need to find what's going to be fulfilling for you. And I was like, it's kind of crazy, but I'm going to see this therapist and she's changing everything about the way that I'm seeing the world. And I've always wanted to help people. I just don't necessarily know how to do that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go to nursing school and dropped out of that. That's a long story. But I was like, what if I became a therapist? Would I totally freak her out? And he was like, if you want to be a therapist, I'll support you being a therapist. And he's been a great support ever since.
He sounds like an amazing cheerleader for you. That's
right? Who is
amazing.
This guy? Like, he's
yeah.
an Italian dude I met on Match.com. I should get paid for their ads.
This episode is sponsored. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I quit working on the Strip and I went to grad school. And I always said I wanted to go into private practice and kind of talk about the benefits of going to therapy and kind of challenging the beliefs about therapy. Because had I started going to therapy when I was 18, the first time a doctor said, maybe there's some issues you could go and talk out, instead of automatically like having that guttural reaction, like, absolutely not, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then I could have been obviously things happen for a reason. And I think that things have turned out amazingly, but it could have helped me so much to be a better, happier person during that 12-year length of time.
Yeah.
So, I graduated actually just earlier this year. In that time, we got married and had 2 babies. So I went to grad school.
Grad school?
Yep.
Yeah,
and I
amazing.
opened my private practice immediately after actually taking a maternity leave with my youngest, which is my 6-month-old son, Jack. And I have an 18-month-old daughter, Adeline, who, since I was in grad school, I couldn't take a maternity leave. I took like 2 weeks and got back to school.
Goodness.
So I was like, I'm going to take some time and then just
well
jump
deserved.
right into practice.
Yeah. Wow. So it probably feels like a complete whirlwind.
Yeah,
but I bet your husband is so proud to see you. I mean, he has literally like cheered you on from the moment this even came to, kind of came to your mind and you were able to vocalize it. And then now here you are. And it's like full circle.
Exactly. I think me graduating was as big of an accomplishment for him as for me. You know?
Yeah. That's awesome. So I have a lot to unpack here. So I have lots of questions. So I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is, are you, if you don't mind sharing, are you still going to therapy? Like,
Absolutely.
do therapists go to therapy?
Good therapists go to therapy. And I
Okay.
will always say that I think every good therapist should go to therapy, because you are taking on the lives of other people all day. Sometimes it's going to trigger things that have happened to you. And so you need to go and process those things. And also, you have your own life where things are constantly changing.
Yeah.
I don't think of therapy as a crisis only situation. I think therapy can be just as preventative as it is for kind of calming the fires once you're already in the midst of a crisis.
Yeah.
So, going to therapy regularly is something that I recommend to anybody who can. And obviously, that's not a possibility for everybody, but
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. And we're going to talk more about the preventative versus, I guess, kind of reactive
yes.
Aspects of this here in a few minutes. So you had 2 kids while you were in grad school, and tell us a little bit about, like, I guess my question is, what have you had to let go of as a mom? And I don't mean for you personally, but just kind of in terms of, like, I just can't care about that right now, kind of thing, in order to keep things moving for your family. Just make sure everybody's getting what they need and being where they have to be, and getting sleep. So I feel like surely something has been let go. So tell us what that is.
I mean, everything.
Yeah.
Sleep, for sure.
Sleep. Oh,
Sleep
man.
is no longer a priority.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in Las Vegas, and my husband used to be a casino executive. So we were living a really fun life for a long time. That is definitely not happening anymore. We're not doing the nightclubs and late night casino gambling and, quick trips with really rich casino guests, which is a bummer, but we lived it out and it was great. And I think that this is what we were working towards all along anyways. So
Yeah. So were you born and raised in Las Vegas?
No, my dad was in the Air Force. So I was born in Spain, and we moved all around Europe and a few states before I actually ended up going to school in California and then settling here in Las Vegas.
Okay, very good. So how do you feel about raising a family in Las Vegas? Does it feel like a family-friendly city, or now that you have kids, are you kind of like, oh, I don't know, like, we'll have to see where life takes us?
When I first moved here, I said I would never live here longer than 5 years.
Okay.
You come here, you make great money, and you get out. And that was always the plan.
Okay.
And that did not happen.
Okay.
Obviously, what you see on the Strip in Las Vegas is very different from the rest of the city. There's an entire bustling city around the Strip that has to take care of this Strip, and all of the workers go all day and work crazy shifts to support all of these tourists. So, we have the normal, like, Target moms, and we have, like, typical housewives and all of our different cliques, just like any other city. And honestly, once you live here long enough, and especially once you become a parent, you just end up not going to the Strip unless it's like a really fancy date night and you want a nice dinner out or something,
Yeah. Well, I think that's how it is in most cities. I mean, like, once you have kids and you're not on that scene anymore, then you kind of stick to your little area.
Exactly.
And you're, like, you find your Target and your grocery store, and you just kind of
your little playground,
hang around. Very different. I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about, feeling like the weight of of people that you meet with and going to therapy. Do you have any other ways that you care for yourself with this job, where you are hearing other people's, stories and problems and kind of carrying that burden?
It's something that you're taught a lot. It's literally from the beginning of school, you're learning that you need to learn really strong and healthy boundaries.
Oh, that's good.
Burnout is incredibly high in this industry because it can be such an emotional burden. And so a full-time therapist is usually about 30 hours a week. And when I first took on this job, I was like, oh, it's only 30 hours a week. You can set your own rates. Then I can go home and take care of the kids. But it's not like that, because then there's a lot of other things that go into, 30 hours with clients is a lot of paperwork, a lot of research, a lot of preparation to get ready for those clients. It's not like you're just going in there and winging it and like listening to them. Then yeah, like you said, you have to go to your own therapist and take care of yourself within those same hours. So for my all around mental well-being, I have found that working out is my greatest release. And it's something that I need to do whether I'm seeing clients that day or whether I'm with the kids all day. And right now I am still trying to prioritize being home with the kids as much as possible. I'm at work 3 days a week and I stay home 2 days a week.
Okay.
I figure just until that's not doable anymore, or until I'm ready to take on a full load of clients, that kind of keeps me feeling like I'm not drowning in mom guilt. And also I'm still pursuing my goal in my business.
Yeah, that's great. What would you say is the biggest misconception when it comes to therapy?
I think that people see it as admitting that there's something wrong with them. And that is the biggest, not detriment, but the biggest deterrent to wanting to go, because then you're asking for help. And we already know that we're a society that is not great at asking for help. We're all about strength, perceived strength and perceived perfection. So asking for help or admitting that something is wrong is already a problem.
Yeah.
And like I said, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that therapy can and should be used in a more preventative sense. I also think that there's also a really terrible stigma of therapists in media, that there's usually like some woo-woo kind of crazy lady or some really like condescending, snarky man. And there's just all these kind of personalities that you wouldn't necessarily want to go with your deepest, darkest problems for, right? Like, of course I don't want to go talk to that person. That's
they
horrifying.
don't seem trustworthy.
So a big part of my message is to find the right therapist, and normal and really cool therapists are out there. So you've just got to look. If you find a bad one, go on to the next one. And it's just like finding any doctor or, any other profession. If you don't like the person you're working with, it doesn't mean that the profession is a bad profession. It just means you're working with the wrong person.
With the wrong person. Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's good. Because I can see how, especially if somebody is dealing with a lot, of stress and a lot of things, that they would just be like, well, like kind of throw their hands up in the air, and just be like, oh, forget it. Like they're not going to be any help. Well, maybe it's just not the right person. Right. And so they just need to keep trying to find the right fit. So that's good.
And if you don't want to go in, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, that's okay.
If you don't want to go in and be a crying mess and all of those things that are also perceived in the media, and, go on about like finding your deepest, darkest traumas, and do you have trauma? It doesn't have to be that way. You guide your own therapy. And for any therapy to be effective, you need to be in control with somebody that you trust. So if somebody's pushing you further than you want to go, that's not the right therapist for you. Or you need to talk to your therapist and say, we need to slow down. I'm not comfortable with this. And it should be just a healthy relationship where you're able to voice those kinds of feelings.
That's good to know. Because I didn't know that. I mean, just in terms of, it being really self-guided from the person receiving the therapy or the counseling. So that's really good to know. So let's talk marriage therapy or counseling. And I'm, in my laypersonness, I'm just probably going to use those words interchangeably, but I essentially mean the same thing. So when we're talking about marriage counseling or marriage therapy, what is that? So for those of us who have never gone to therapy, period, much less with a spouse, what does it look like? Do you go together? Do you go separately? Is it a combination of both? And I know that, I'm sure it varies kind of depending on the circumstances, but for a couple who is kind of exploring whether or not this is something they should do, kind of give us like a marriage counseling 101 in terms of what to expect.
So because there are so many different types of therapists and we're all different personalities, it can vary from therapist to therapist. And that's another reason why you have to find kind of the mix that you are most comfortable with. What I prefer to do is I do like to see the couple together most times. There would be maybe really rare instances where I would separate them, but I feel like when I'm seeing a couple, the identified patient, as we call it, is the relationship. It's not one person or the other. So I would typically always want the couple there. And the goal of the therapy session or the therapy process is whatever their goal is in mind. And that's always the first thing that I ask couples when they come in. Are you guys considering divorce? Are we looking for a healthy and easy divorce process where we keep clear communication and we co-parent effectively and we make this as not messy as possible? Or are we trying to save this marriage? Is the goal for this relationship to work and you guys are really going to put in the work to make some changes and adjust some of the patterns that aren't working for you? So those are things that you have to think of before you go in, or at least be willing to explore with your therapist, and creating that goal as your first step.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So it can be, technically it sounds like it could be either or in terms of separate or together, but it sounds like it's perhaps more productive in a lot of circumstances
I feel like it's less messy.
Yeah. So, for people to, like, everybody's hearing the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So,
exactly. And that's what it is some people would rather be by themselves and then they're telling you secrets about maybe infidelity. And you're like, no, this is a huge part of this relationship that should have been brought up between the three of us, So I just feel like it's always a cleaner process to have both in the room for each session.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. So I've heard people say, and this kind of goes back to the preventative, approach that we were talking about earlier, but I've heard people say that all couples should go to therapy for just maintenance. And so what does that mean? So if a couple's coming in for, I'm using air quotes, maintenance counseling, what types of things are discussed? And then what can they expect when when there's not really, a tense situation, and you're not dealing with a specific problem?
Well, then we've got to kind of dive into what is working for you and what's not working for you. So even if things aren't tense, maybe you're noticing that you're not getting enough quality time. I feel like intimacy is always an issue somewhere underlying. Someone wants to talk about intimacy. And I feel like it's such a stigmatized topic that it comes up in therapy more often than it comes up at home. So a maintenance session could be a good landing pad for that.
Yeah.
Or I do like a lot of premarital counseling or even pre-child counseling, where you're just kind of anticipating what might be changing in your future, whether one of you is maybe retiring or switching jobs. So just kind of looking into the future and anticipating what types of transitions might be happening and how it might affect your marriage, and then kind of creating a goal and a plan to make it as seamless as possible.
Okay, that's good. So as a therapist, is that a recommendation that you would have for folks, that they go to a therapist just kind of preventatively together? Or do you see that more of something that people should be doing individually, preventatively?
I feel like so I definitely am on board with doing it preventatively. If there's not a problem, then there's no need to create a problem, So I guess
that's a really good point.
Just because things aren't like in a fire bin and like terrible and you guys are like screaming and yelling at each other doesn't mean that there aren't underlying problems.
Yeah.
And if there are underlying problems that you want to be able to hash out and have a mediator because it's going to make a more effective argument or a more just effective compromise between the two of you,
Right.
then by all means do that. But I don't know that, stirring up a problem where there's not a problem
Yeah.
is the healthiest thing.
Yeah. So is there anything that you would add to kind of what someone could expect if they're coming in alone, just for themselves preventatively?
Coming in for themselves, again, I would think of it. So I try to specialize in a lot of life's transitions.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that preventative therapy is kind of taking on the expectations of what is to come and putting that in smaller pieces and making that more manageable,
Okay.
rather than, again, things are going great and you're doing great at your job and you've met the best person of your life, and then coming in and being like, okay, what should I talk about with you?
Yeah.
Because the therapist's role is to throw it back on you and be like, well, what do we need to work on? So
Yeah.
unless you have an issue that you're anticipating, and anxiety is such a huge topic or a problem within our society that
Mm-hmm.
it's often the case that there's underlying anxiety that you're not coping with, or things that you're not even acknowledging are happening maybe.
Yeah.
So I could see that as being something that you could discuss in one of those sessions.
Yeah. So let's talk about anxiety for a minute. So I think we are in a world right now, or at least a society here, where, I think doctors, especially with moms, are kind of easy to pick up on anxiety and say, oh, I can, write, and I'm not against this, but to say, I can write you a prescription for, an anti-anxiety medication. I know my OB did that at an appointment where I was particularly wound up. And it wasn't the first appointment where I had been especially wound up. I mean, it was definitely a pattern, but I think he finally saw it, and was like, okay, like we have a way that we can deal with this.
Right.
But he never really recommended talking it through, so
yes, I'm so glad you're going here.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I guess I don't even know what my question is, other than to say, I feel like, there's probably a lot of moms walking around who are taking anti-anxiety medication, and from a therapist standpoint, does most of that need to go deeper and be explored, or should we just expect that our serotonin levels, is that the right thing? Our serotonin levels are off and they just need to be rebalanced with medicine, or should we all be trying to dig a little bit deeper?
So I'm not a doctor, and therapists cannot prescribe medication.
Okay.
So I think the perception is typically that therapists are anti-medication.
Okay.
And that's not the case at all. But there is a thin line between putting a Band-Aid on a deeper problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And medicating when it's necessary.
Yeah.
So I don't want to speak on postpartum anxiety because that's not something that I specialize in. And like I said, I can't see it from a doctor's perspective.
Right.
But we are the most medicated country in the world.
Yeah.
And we have the highest rates of anxiety and depression and suicide and addiction in the world. And I think that there is a discussion that needs to be had about why these medications are being prescribed with no talk of therapy, which does teach you the tools to help cope with symptoms of anxiety and delve in deeper to where they're coming from, and can mitigate most of those symptoms to where you're not needing that prescription on a regular basis.
Okay.
So medication, I do believe in, especially in anxiety and depression, because it can be an overwhelming, not lifestyle, but an overwhelming
existence.
I can't think of. Thank you.
That's what I would say.
It can be an overwhelming existence, sure, to be struggling with anxiety and depression. You're struggling to get out of bed. You're struggling to bathe yourself. Like, it's like the basic functions of a human being.
Yeah.
So if you can't even function on a regular day-to-day basis, and anxiety medication or antidepressants are going to help you with that, by all means take them. But that's not the end-all, cure-all for all anxiety and depression. And I think that it shouldn't be a long-term prescription. It should be to help you cope while you're able to go and see a therapist and talk about some of the deeper issues and learn some of the tools to help prevent it or even identify it so that you can attack it more head on next time it's coming on in the future.
Okay. Yeah, that's really good.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good. Okay, so in terms of thinking about tools and kind of things that people can do, and I'm sure that it varies from person to person and situation to situation, but in particular, because we kind of started out talking about couples, and I know that as I understand it, you do a lot of work with marriage and kind of family therapy. What are some tools or things that couples could do kind of proactively or preventatively at home, just in their relationship, to avoid having to get to a point where, they're now dealing with an issue where they have to go because there's a problem?
Communicate. And I know that sounds like such a cliche answer, but I think that we learn really terrible ways to actually communicate our emotions or even to identify our own emotions growing up. And it definitely impacts our relationships and then how we communicate or miscommunicate those feelings. So learning to be more honest and open with your partner and being more vulnerable and showing weakness and asking for help are all things that create the deeper kind of relationship where you're able to attack problematic issues or transitioning issues together rather than kind of fighting each other or misinterpreting what you think the other person's feeling or thinking because they're acting a certain way and normally they act this way or that way. So learning to be a little more direct with one another and then listening openly and honestly and helpfully to your partner when they are in a spot of vulnerability.
Yeah.
That was a long answer for a really short question.
Yeah, no, that's really good. But and I think that, what that says, I mean, just the fact that when you break down communication, you rattled off all the ways that we could communicate better. And I think that what that says is unpacking like what communication is in a relationship. Like it's very complicated. And so if a couple's not communicating well today, I think they probably shouldn't expect to be like, okay, we're going to communicate better. And then tomorrow things are, like, oh,
exactly.
now we're doing great.
Fan, it's not going to get any better. It is going to get by far worse. And then you kind of adopt that habit and then it spirals from there. And so to be short and concise, it's literally what they say, to listen, to actually hear instead of listening to respond, I think is the best way to start healthy communication with your partner.
Okay, say that one more time. You listen to hear and not to respond. So what does that mean? In any conversation, in executing that in a with your spouse, like how do you do that?
So in any conversation, you tend to hear something and you want them to know that you're listening. So you might dive in with your next thought and you want to seem so attentive and, oh, I can relate to that. But sometimes you just need to hear what they're saying without any pretense or any pre-thought out conversation or response for them and really take it in. And a lot of things that we practice on my couch, I guess, is kind of mirroring the conversation. So one partner will say, I'm feeling this. And rather than responding, the other partner will say, I hear you saying you feel this, before they're allowed to respond to that feeling.
Okay, that's good. That's a really good tool. And I know I'm guilty of just jumping right in and,
honestly, I am too.
Yeah. I mean, I think
it's
that's
human nature.
It's human nature. Right. But it's important to think about the impact that has. So that's really good. Okay. We're busy moms and, a lot of the moms that listen have jobs and, spouse is running in one direction in the morning and mom is running in the other direction in the morning, and like everybody's hair is on fire all the time. And I do think that, especially when you have little kids, and I'm sure you can probably relate to this, that I think a lot of us feel like as parents, or as like a married couple, I mean, we don't have time to like have deep conversations, I mean, it's like, okay, what's for dinner? Like who's going to the grocery store? I mean, it's just a lot of just keeping our head above the water for, I think, a lot of couples in this stage of life. So if you're talking to the really busy moms who, there's not a problem per se, but everybody's running in a million directions, it might feel like a lot to bite off in terms of, okay, now we're going to communicate better, because you can't necessarily change the pressures of like the stage of life. So on a very small scale, I guess kind of in addition to the listen to hear, is there anything else? Like, are there any tools or anything that you would give to moms to be able, not only with their spouse, but even with their kids, just to be able to kind of clear up communication and misunderstanding at home?
Hang on, I thought that was going somewhere else, and I was prepared with an answer. I
take
was
it where you
not
want to take
listening to listen. I was listening to respond.
That's funny. Well, what were you going to say?
I was going to say prioritize time and make time for the marriage or for yourself. Because I thought you were going to say, how do you find time to communicate or to go into deep communication?
Yeah, well, that too. That is also my question.
So I think that, and this is controversial, but I think that when you prioritize your marriage or you prioritize your self-health and your self-care, it makes you a better mother and better parents in the long run. My husband always says, I chose you first, and we decided to have the kids as a part of our love. So our love always has to come first. And he's not even a therapist, so I got to give him the credit for that, because
he's smart.
I tell all my couples that now, that if that's not the priority in the long run, everything comes from that relationship. You're teaching your kids how to create future relationships and how to manage conflict and how to talk healthily and communicate and hear and listen to each other and discuss feelings. And so prioritizing yourself as a mother and as your own human being outside of motherhood and as a part of a couple and a loving relationship is, I think, incredibly important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that moms are better moms when they are taking good care of themselves. And,
absolutely.
Better spouses too. So that's good. All right. So are there ever circumstances where, and I'm sure that there are, but kind of how can parents gauge whether children need to come in with parents or come in alone? Is that a conversation that should be happening with like a pediatrician, or how does that work when you start talking about bringing kids in?
So like I said, as a marriage and family therapist, I always see everybody as a product of their surrounding people. So,
okay.
If you're having a problem at home with your child, most children of a certain age are not acting negatively because they have ill will or because they, have poor communication skills. They're a product of their surroundings and a product of their parents, and parents do not like to hear this. And I hate to have to break it to parents, but I will not see a child without the parents agreeing to come in at some point, because in order for the child to change that negative behavior, the entire family is going to have to change to accommodate the tools and behavior that the child's learning, or nothing's ever going to change long term. So I guess if you're questioning whether or not your child needs to see a therapist, you can certainly ask your pediatrician. Like I said, the mental health and the medical world are not as aligned as I wish that we were. But you're also able to find your own therapist I always recommend that people search on Psychology psychologytoday.com, and you can search in your area and then filter it for, somebody who specializes in child therapy. And typically, I think it usually is a marriage and family therapist, but they can do different types of theories or ideologies like play therapy and art therapy and things that are easier to actually communicate with a younger child. But I personally would always recommend that the family is at some point also involved. And that includes other siblings too, because you don't know what's going on behind closed doors with those little kids. They're sneaky and manipulative, and there's a lot that parents, I think, miss. And not because they're negligent by any means. It's because we're human beings and we're egocentric and we're built to be able to prioritize ourselves first. And
yeah, that is true. Yeah, they are sneaky little things.
It's an adaptive coping skill. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned, you said psychologytoday.com, because I was going to ask, my next question was, is there a good way to find a local therapist? And so you kind of answered that. So that leads me to question, B of that question, which is, are there frauds out there? Like, are we looking for a particular license or letters after someone's name? Like, how can we know that we're talking to a legitimate person?
Yes. And that's also such a good, I don't even know if I want to dive into that, but there's a lot of coaches available right now.
Okay. Yes.
And that's the greatness of social media, is that we're able to share our skills and our passions with each other, and we're able to connect on deeper levels. If you're looking for a licensed therapist, or like I said, in my case, a licensed therapist intern, there are a few acronyms that you can look for. So I am both a marriage and family therapist intern, so that would be MFTI, or just MFT, or a certified professional counselor, which would be CPC. Okay. There's a licensed clinical social worker, LCSW, a licensed drug and alcohol counselor, LDAC. And then if you are looking to stay within the psychology field for things like testing for autism or any sort of psychological testing, that would go through a psychologist. And then if you're looking for medication specifically in regards to psychology, it would be a psychiatrist. So
okay, that's good.
PhD.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. That's helpful.
Well, and they're an MD and then a PhD.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for covering that, because I know. But I think for those of us who don't know, I think that it does feel kind of overwhelming, because it's like,
it is.
Who it are we, and that's looking for?
Yeah, I know. So I'm actually planning a post talking about just kind of unveiling all of the different acronyms and what they mean and what they stand for and their different specifications. And I feel like education is the best way to combat stigma. So
yeah,
I'm glad you asked. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. I always like to ask moms at the end of the episode a question that is about them and kind of looking ahead, because ultimately, you're doing a service to other women and to moms and to families, but I like to bring it back around to you as the mom and the guest and the person who is being influential, influential motherhood. So Lindsey, what would you say is your own goal for either fourth quarter 2019 or for 2020?
I guess having just graduated and having just opened my practice, I'm really kind of hustling in my marketing and doing a lot of social media and things like that. So I'd like to be a more well-known name in the field, I guess, especially in my city. But there are only so many therapists who are very public on social media right now. And any therapist knows there's about 3 of them. So I'm working to, like I said, help carry my message to as many people as possible. And so I would hope that I'm gaining that following and succeeding in spreading that message a little bit further.
Yeah, I think it's good, because I think it's helping to destigmatize therapy and counseling and just make it more of a, I don't know, like, an
approachable topic.
Approachable topic, yeah.
Yeah.
And something that can be in our toolbox. Like you
Exactly.
started out by saying it wasn't in your family's, you didn't use that word toolbox, but
exactly.
the package of things that you could use to deal with an issue. And
exactly.
So I think it's really good that you're making this something that people can learn about and see about in a little bit more of a passive way before it, by like watching, hearing you talk about it online and sharing about it on things like that, this episode, so that people are like, okay, I feel like I can learn about it before I have to go do something that I've only seen on TV, kind of thing.
Where you're not so overwhelmed and scared by it that you just completely shut it out, that there's somebody approachable and kind of like you that is talking about it and makes it seem a little more doable.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you're doing a great job. So tell us where people can find you and how they can follow along and keep learning from you.
My Instagram is where I'm the most active, and that is at Lindsey_Paoli. And should I spell that? LINDSEY_PAOLI.
Yep.
And on Facebook at Fundamental Health LV.
Very good. Very good. Well, Lindsey, thank you for what you're doing to bring awareness to this resource for moms and for families and for children and individuals. I think it's so important, and you're doing great work. And I'm excited to hear a goal update from you. And maybe this time next year we can get an update from you and see how you're doing. And I think you're doing great work.
A spot on goals, and I didn't follow any of my own recommendations for goal setting in that, but that's okay. It's not a measurable or specific goal, whatever.
That's okay. That's all right. That's all right. Well, thank you again, Lindsey. And I'll link all of your Instagram and website and everything in the show notes for the people who are driving in their car.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, Lindsey.
Bye.
I'm so thankful for the moms who share their stories on here on the show and in our fun Instagram community. I'd love for you to connect with me online at Influential Motherhood on Instagram and Facebook to continue the conversation or just say hello. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star rating and a written review in the Apple Podcast app. It's how you can help get the show in front of moms looking for episodes just like this one. I hope you'll find a way to influence your work or community for good this week. Don't forget, you can listen to other episodes or learn more about the show at www.influentialmotherhood.com. See you next week.